It's my privilege to introduce our guest today, Martha Miles. Martha is a software training analyst at Micron. She currently creates and delivers internal training for a global audience ranging from workers on the fabrication floor to executives. We all know that the skill training we create has value when it helps others in the workplace act more like its best. And we know that IDs typically work with exemplary performers to conduct task analyses to represent what these people do on the job. And whether you call them exemplary performers, subject matter experts, SMEs, or SMEs, catching these cats by the tail can be hard. During her time with us, Martha will provide tips from the trenches for working with SMEs. She'll talk about the difference between SMEs and training's focus, how to build a positive relationship with your SME, the key to success when working with your SME or SME. She'll provide or talk about workplace examples, and she'll also answer your questions. Martha, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'd like to welcome everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your day to attend this webinar. I'm happy to speak to you about my experience working with SMEs. My journey has been a little bit different than a lot of people in the training world or the instructional design world. I was in the training world as an instructional designer. I then became a subject matter expert when I moved into an SAP configuration analyst position. And SAP is the enterprise business system that Micron uses to drive everything within the company. And then they needed somebody to train SAP, so I came back into the training world as an instructional designer. I have over 25 years in the training field, and most of my experience has been in software systems training. However, the information I'm going to present today can apply to all types of instructional design and training. Throughout the presentation, I'll be using training as a generic term, and it's inclusive of all activities related to training, including instructional design, creating e-learning, anything related to providing training or education to an end user to improve their performance in the workplace. I'm also using PowerPoint techniques that I've learned at training and ATD conferences. And ATD you may have known as ASTD. It's the Association for Training Professionals. But I want to give the caveat that I am not a graphic designer. But the training world is really going to more graphic-based presentations. When I'm working with subject matter experts, a lot of times I feel like I'm herding cats. So I have subject matter experts who won't pay attention to me. They have their back turned to me. They have their tail turned to me. And then there's the one subject matter expert in the corner who is actually looking at me. And that's the one that gives me a lot of help and will bring others in. But I've come to the point where I really love herding cats or working with subject matter experts because they can provide a lot of information to me. And I'm sure that many of you who are working in the field have had the same experience. For those who aren't working in the field yet, you'll probably experience this feeling as you work in the field. This presentation will give you some techniques to go from this graphic of working with your subject matter expert to this graphic of working with your subject matter expert. The degree that you receive and the principles that you learn and your processes, such as the ADDIE model, some people call it SAM, some people call it LLAMA, but any of that process information that you learn is critical. What you're learning in your university classes are critical to be successful in the instructional design field, the training field. And these principles you need to follow when you're in the work world in order to have successful training implementations. So it's very critical. The reality, though, is when you get into the work world, really they only care about your degree when they are doing the recruiting and the hiring, and whoever's interviewing you is going to be asking you questions about your methodology. And it's critical in the work world to follow that methodology in order to have successful training implementation. But really, the subject matter experts and the people that you're working with don't really care about your degree. They care about results. And if you come in and start talking your ADDIE language, first of all, they won't know what you're talking about, so it will be confusing to them. And also, sometimes it's they don't accept the degree as a positive thing. They're going to want to see results. You have to learn to translate what you've learned into the language of the workplace, and all the workplaces that you're going to be in are different. So I do use the ADDIE model when I develop, and I keep that in the back of my mind, but my subject matter experts do not know that I'm using that model. But it allows me to be extremely successful in what I create in the work area. Your degree doesn't open doors for you with your subject matter experts, the results do. If you're new to the workplace, and you're coming into a workplace, it's really critical that you listen to what your subject matter experts have to tell you. You can learn a lot. It's really critical also to learn the culture and the politics and how you behave in the workplace, and then find a mentor if you can. I'm actually working with someone who graduated from the program at BSU that you're in, and I am very happy to be her mentor, and I'm learning as much from her as she's learning from me. It's a two-way conversation. She's doing reverse mentoring with me, and I'm doing mentoring with her, and it's an awesome relationship. So find that person who's going to help you work through the SMEs, who's going to be able to mentor you and how to actually be successful when you're working with your subject matter experts. There are differences in subject matter expert and training focus in the workplace. Subject matter experts are concerned about getting what they have to produce out by the due date. If you're in information technology, you're driven by code review, deadlines, testing, and QA cycles, availability of development environments, things of that nature. And the project's done when you go live. So go live is the target date when the system's going to be out available in production to the end users. That's what they are driven by. Their main focus may not be, and probably isn't, end user adoption. They don't think about that. And it's rare for this to happen. And if you find a subject matter expert who is pro training, consider that to be a luxury. Also, the business is going to be really happy because the solution's out there. So they want to get that solution out there, and that's what their focus is. On the other hand, in training, we're concerned about the end user being able to perform. We're concerned about them being able to use the system or change their behavior based on what the subject matter expert is putting out there. Training is done near the go live date and will typically be crunched for time just because of changes that may happen, especially if you're doing system training at go live. Okay, what techniques do you have to use to help SMEs go from deadlines to worrying about the performance stuff? I think I'm going to hit on that in the things that I'm going to talk about in building a positive relationship with subject matter experts, but if I don't talk about that, remind me at the end, and I'll talk about that as we go through. So how do you build a positive relationship with subject matter experts? So maybe they see that it's important for people to be able to perform. I think some of the things that I hit on are going to talk about that, but I had an interesting experience with the project that I'm working on right now. We are implementing product lifecycle management at Micron, and it used to be that I had to actually really try really hard to get involved in a project. I was forgotten about. They brought me in a week before the project was going to go live, and then they said create training. With the product lifecycle management project, I've been brought in at the beginning, and they have said that 99% of the success of the program is going to be the end users being able to do the process and the tool, and that is dependent on training. And so it's awesome that they think that way, and it's also a little bit scary from a instructional design training perspective. So I think some of these tips that I'm going to give you have been what has allowed me to move from coming in at the last week to coming in at the beginning of a project. It's been an interesting journey over the past many years. So how can I build a positive relationship with your subject matter expert? When I was a subject matter expert, and training came to me, I felt like this. I felt like it was a gnat or a fly buzzing around my head, and I just wanted to swat the training person and get them to leave me alone. And I have a training background, so you can imagine how people feel who don't have a training background. If I felt that way with a training background, training was the last thing on my mind. And the reason was because I had different priorities that I had to focus on as a subject matter expert and as a configuration analyst. So the things that I'm going to talk about to be able to work with your subject matter expert are things that I found to be successful and also things that would have made me want to work with training people. The first thing that I do is it's really important to do due diligence and be independent as much as possible. Try to insert yourself in the process early. Ask to be invited to meetings and go to both the business meetings and the subject matter expert meetings. It's really critical that you try to get inserted into the process as early as possible. If you can't get inserted in the process early, just ask to be included on email distribution lists so you know what's going on with the project. It also makes you a much better trainer because you know the history of how decisions were made. A lot of people would think that's a waste of my time to go in at the beginning of the when this project's starting, but it allows you to know the history. You are better able to answer questions that the end users have when you're doing the training. Try to do as much independently as possible. I always do a lot of research and I understand the basics before I start asking questions of my subject matter experts so I can speak their language. There's a lot of information out there. There are documents, software specs. You can ask for access to a test environment to get into the system. And attend testing. It's really critical if you're doing software implementations that you attend testing so you can hear the questions that people are asking, because that lets you know what your training focus should be. And also, if you can see where they get stuck, that allows you to add that to your training. Be aware of the subject matter experts' deadlines. A lot of training people aren't aware of when code deadlines are due in the system or testing cycles need to be completed. If you need to meet with finance, don't meet with them at the end of their month end or when they have to get finance information out. Ask them when it's a good time to meet with them before you schedule meetings. Understand their schedule. And that was one thing that really bothered me when I was a subject matter expert was I had to get code out on Thursdays, and the trainers wanted to meet with me on Thursday morning, and that caused an issue. Also, don't escalate too quickly. I give the subject matter expert time to respond to an email. I worked with a training person who, if I didn't respond to the email in an hour, he would escalate to my supervisor. And find out who has the role in the company that you're trying to find out information about. If you want to talk to somebody who is creating, for instance, a training sandbox for you, find out who that correct person is and talk to that person so you're not wasting the subject matter expert's time. I've also created training on things like giving feedback, and I will do a lot of research on that and get a plan in place before I meet with subject matter experts. So this goes for both system training and non-system training. Make good use of the subject matter expert's time. So subject matter experts are extremely busy. So be prepared when you meet with your subject matter expert. You'll be lucky if you can get 30 minutes with them, and you want to make sure you're making good use of their time. I've worked with training people in the training field who will ask single questions of the subject matter expert and then come back and ask another question and then come back and ask another question. Bundle your questions. And it's better to have a meeting than rely on email, just because you have that face-to-face contact, you're building that rapport, and also if you're trying to respond by email, you can get into an email issue where you're sending an email, they're responding, you're sending another one, they're responding. So it's better to have that face-to-face contact. Also, make sure that your training materials are in as good shape as possible before you show them to the subject matter expert. A tip that we have found that's worked really, really well that we didn't do for a while, but has helped us working with the subject matter experts, is when we meet with them, We will record them using, we have Camtasia and Captivate at Micron. You may have Articulate or some other recording. You might record through Skype, those kinds of things. What we've found has been very effective is we record the subject matter experts, and then we can go and review that recording later, so we don't have to ask them questions that they've already answered that maybe we didn't capture down in writing. This is one that is going to make your subject matter expert really want to work with you in the future, is that if you can help them be successful, they will really want to work with you in the future. If you are going through a system and you find some bugs, let them know. So it's going to make them look good. You're the connection to the end user. You're speaking for the end user. So think like the end user. And if something doesn't make sense, ask the person. Also ask questions that they may not think of asking. I had a situation where I was creating some training materials. We were implementing some HR systems in Japan. And I noticed that there was a US link on the page. And I wasn't sure if there should be a US link or not. And so I asked the subject matter expert if it should be there. And I caught something that they hadn't caught. And so it made them look good that that wasn't there. I also asked questions like, will the supervisors be doing anything differently in the system than the team members? And so it gets them to think of things that they might not have thought of before. Catch those gotchas that are going to cause them problems once things go live. And work as a team with your subject matter expert. It should be a collaboration between you and the subject matter expert. And I think it's really critical to become friends with your SME. You want to help your friends out. And so if you can become friends with your subject matter expert, they're going to want to help you out. I try to meet with my subject matter expert face-to-face whenever possible and try to build some positive rapport. Show interest in them as people and have it be genuine interest. I had a subject matter expert that I was having difficulty developing a relationship with, and I knew that she had gone through some tough times recently, and so I just sat down and you take them to coffee and say, how's it going? How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help you? And that goes a long way. And one thing I'll also do is I will send, that's a good comment. We once built SME relationships by bringing food to our meetings. Yes, I do bring food, and that goes a really long way. A lot of times they're working a lot of long hours and they don't get that type of thing. So that will go a really long way. So great point, whoever chatted that. Another thing that I'll do is I'll send an email to their supervisor and CC them, if they've been a great help, and that goes a really long way. That helps with their performance evaluation. You're seen as their ally. You can question and ask how they made decisions, but don't overly question, and don't question in a way that it seems that you're questioning what their decision was. There's a fine line on that. And so those are just some tips of how you can become friends with them. Is there anything anyone else has done to try to build that positive relation with the subject matter experts that I didn't mention? If you want to chat it, or oh, that's a good question. What accommodations do you make for SMEs in other time zones? I have a tendency to come in really early and stay really late, so I am meeting their timeline. So I typically will I will actually meet with them in their time zone. So I can't remember if it's Europe or it's Japan, but I think it's for anyway, one of them you need to come have your meetings like 6 in the morning, and the other you need to have your meetings at 5 at night at the earliest, or late 6 a.m. in the morning at the latest, and then 5 p.m. in the evening at the earliest. And so I meet with them at their time zone, and that works well. I don't expect them to adjust to the U.S. time zone. So that's what I do. And we do have sites all over the world, so we do deal with the time zone issue. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Ted.
Hi, Ted.
One of the things that I've done recently is Working for Microsoft, everyone has their own little picture up over Skype. And so some of the guys will have pictures of them with a motorcycle, or people have pictures with them and their kids. And it's really no different than when you work in an office with someone. You walk in and you see pictures on the wall. You know if that person likes to boat, or if they love their dogs, or if they have an old convertible that they restored and drive around. So little things to build relationships and help them understand that you're not just that person coming and nagging, asking for new information that to them is juvenile to be asking for, or just inexperienced. It's really helpful to build relationships overall, and this will benefit you professionally, regardless of what your role is as the trainer with a SME or the trainer with an executive.
I agree. I think that's an excellent point, and especially if you're working with international counterparts. So, for instance, the people in Japan are very much about relationship building. So I've even started out meetings where I've said, okay, everybody tell an interesting fact about yourself that nobody would know. And we will start a lot of meetings, even our internal meetings, with talk about what you did on the weekend. It's really, I definitely agree with you, Ted. It's so important to build that rapport, because if you see someone as your friend, then they're going to want to work with you. And if you don't see that, the collaboration's not going to be there. They're not going to want to be helpful. And I definitely agree with what you're saying, Ted, that whole building that relationship goes so far to making things work well. Thanks for the point. So I have a question. Do you use webinar software during your global meetings? How do you use it? We use Skype a lot for meetings. And so we'll actually share our screens and things of that nature, and people will call in. We also have some video conference rooms where we can actually see the other site, so it's like you're in the same room with them. And I don't know if your companies will have that, but that works really well. So you're in the same room, but Micron has a couple of RPX video rooms that we will use, but we pretty much use Skype. And we do have, some people do webinars, but pretty much the standard for us is Skype. But the RPX room works really well also. Yeah, that's a really good point, Kelly, to let them know that, it's going to help them. It's a win-win. I'm going to help you, and you'll be helping me. Yes, still developers are very linear. I agree. And I also speak their language rather than an instructional design language, and I'll talk about that in a minute, how I've done that, but I agree. So I typically, we actually have a document that we use to gather initial information from the subject matter expert that asks things like, who's the audience, where are they located, those just the basic analysis questions that you would ask, what do you need them to be able to do at the end of this, that kind of thing. And so I'll do an initial due diligence, but then when it comes to putting the training materials together, I typically will create something for them to respond to and react to, and then we'll go from there. So I think you can go either way. I typically do enough due diligence at the beginning with the questions that I have that I'm able to then proceed from there. But I do meet with them in the beginning just to find out what they're looking for and what they're expecting and what they expect the end goal to be. Some of the keys to success that I found are realizing that subject matter experts are going to be different. If you have cats, a calico has a totally different personality than a black cat. I have a calico at home and I have a yellow tabby, and they are totally different in personality. So it's getting used to those personalities and learning to work with them. A critical role that we play is that we are a conduit between the subject matter expert and the end user. I speak both end user language and I speak subject matter expert language, and so I can be that conduit between the two of them, and it's a really critical role that training plays, I think. And then Ted, I think you were the one who asked about people being linear, and this is what I found is I speak my subject matter expert's language, And so when I first started working on project, we were doing a computer cutover at Micron to bring the computer systems to Japan and Taiwan. And so I was meeting with my subject matter experts, and I said, I need to do a training analysis to find out the gap and what they need to be trained on. And I got nothing. I went to about 3 meetings and I got no responses. And I thought, this is really strange because I know that there is a gap and there are things that people are going to need to be trained on. And I couldn't even get the answer that, okay, they're not using Outlook Mail. And that was a huge gap. And so I was trying to find out, okay, what are they using for their mail system, all these kinds of things, and where the gap would be between what they were using currently and what they were going to use with Outlook. And so I changed my wording of that question. It's the same question, but it was a language that they could understand. And so how I reworded that question is I said, what's going to cause you the most heartburn if they do it wrong? And so it was like, if the end user doesn't do what you need them to do. And so it was putting in their language, okay, what's going to cause you the most problems or the most heartburn? I got pages of answers at that point. I have, Ted says start with the 5 whys. I have used the 5 whys, and it's been very effective to get information from them. Yeah, so I'm familiar with that methodology. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the 5 whys, you start out and you say, okay, the person doesn't know how to use Outlook. Why? And they'll say, because they're using this system. Well, why? And you'll get down to a root cause or a root gap that you need to fill. So it's just it's a way of getting people into more of the level that you need for information. But I think if you reframe it in their language and don't use training speak, then that'll be it's been more effective for me. The heartburn question's been really effective to get information. I've seen this be the downfall of instructional designers that I've worked with is that they overvalidate. And so they go to one subject matter expert, but then they're validating with every other subject matter expert. And so you need to find out who the subject matter expert is that you actually are going to go to, because you're going to have subject matter experts and you're going to get a lot of different information, and then you're going to be confused. So there has to be one subject matter expert who actually is the owner of whatever you're trying to train or create instructional design materials for. I have seen training people get into analysis paralysis, and the definition of that is the condition of being unable to make a decision due to the availability of too much information which must be processed in order for the decision to be made. So you get all this information together, but you don't really know what to do with it, and so you get paralyzed by the analysis. And you just need to realize that it's hard, because in school you want to turn in a perfect project, and your training is not going to be perfect because things are going to change to go live and even after. And in the workplace, your grade is based on results. And I got a good quote from Amanda, who's working with me, who was in your program. She said, "You don't have to shoot in order to aim. You just have to shoot and see how far off you are of the mark, and then you'll be course corrected." There's a question: what techniques do you use when your SMEs disagree with each other? There has to be an ultimate decision maker. And so I typically would go to that ultimate, Ted says candy, yeah, bribery, I agree with that. So I typically will find out who the ultimate decision maker is and have that person make the decision for me. I don't typically go to a lot of subject matter experts. I typically know who the person is I should be talking to. And I also think you find out who probably is your best subject matter expert to give you the correct information. This one, expect and embrace changes. It's been a really interesting journey for me training software systems, because the system with us, they are configuring the system up to go live, and they don't a lot of times think about training, that we need time to make changes. So I've come to expect and embrace changes. I realize that it's going to change, and I try not to get frustrated. Um, and don't complain to your subject matter expert if things do change. It's the nature of the business, and they're working under a tight timeline also. And also, a lot of times your subject matter experts won't remember to tell you about changes. And so I've been in situations where I will, before I train, I always go and I check the system before I train. And then there have been times when I've actually been training in class and the system's changed. They've put in a enhancement that you were expecting to see. And then I'll be training and I'll say, oh, we're expecting to have this enhancement in next week. And then it's there and I'll say, oh, well, they got it in early. That's awesome. That's not what I'm thinking. But I don't present my frustration in front of the trainees. This is an interesting one. So you create training and you think it's awesome and it looks like this. Your subject matter expert wanted it to look like this. The content's the same. But they didn't want quite so many bells and whistles or what they consider to be fluff. You may not consider it to be fluff. They don't want those graphics, whatever. The subject matter expert is your customer, and so you really typically need to go with what they want. If it's really, you feel like it's destroying your training, like they want to take out validation questions, I would explain to them why the validation questions are critical from a training perspective. But if it's just, they don't like a certain graphic, they're your customer, so you need to go with them. And I've had things that I thought were really beautiful, and they want this, and you pretty much go with what they want as long as it's not totally destroying the content or the message. I'm seeing the question, what techniques have you used when you're doing a task analysis on nuanced psychomotor skills? Can you give me a little bit more idea of what you're looking for?
Hi, Martha. It's Steve. I know one of the people who is with us today is with a project that our students are doing for the Coast Guard. And they're looking at doing a task analysis, trying to figure out how people who are really good handle mooring lines for Coast Guard cutters.
Okay.
And I'm imagining that you're not dealing with mooring lines, but you might be dealing with real nuanced techniques that people might be using in terms of things that happen on the fabrication floor.
Okay, so if it's something that's already been implemented, I actually was involved in a job analysis project a really long time ago at Micron, where we actually had to look into this type of thing. And so what we did was we actually watched people performing the job. We asked, who are your top performers? And we watched them perform the job so we could see what they were doing. And then we also talked to the super, what makes your top performer the top performer? What do they do differently than the people who aren't top performers? So it was an observation. It was also asking the supervisors. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Steve?
Yes. And I guess the other thing that strikes me now is that in an age where, our cell phones are cameras, that there are opportunities while interacting with these folks and as they're actually doing these things to record what they're doing and then do step-by-step walkthroughs afterwards.
That's true. But yeah, I agree. And that it's very much observation. You can watch the stellar performers and see what they're doing, and hopefully you'll see differences between what the average performer is doing as opposed to the stellar performers. But it's a lot of observation, a lot of recording, and that type of thing. Ted, have you been to Singapore?
No, I have not. I am going to China in October though.
Oh, if you want some tips, contact me after. I've been there, so I can give you some tips. No, the reason I said that mind the gap is whenever you're on the subway in Singapore, they're always saying mind the gap. So I thought maybe
Hmm.
you had been there. Yeah, if you want some tips on China, I'd be happy to, if you haven't been there.
No. And one of the things that I was going to
Do you have your
contribute to
visa?
the video was that video can actually provide a great opportunity for reflection on muscle memory skills and things of that nature that people aren't even aware of. And if you ever want to explore with this, go to a professional running store and they have a treadmill, and they'll put you on the treadmill and they videotape your feet and videotape you jogging. And then when you get off the treadmill, they go, okay, here's what you're doing with your form. And they're able to show you, making you more aware of how straight your back is and where your feet are coming down and whether or not you're braking. But that's one of those things that you can do to provide the opportunity for reflection so that the lesson that you deliver has more meaning and it's a little more applicable to them.
Oh, okay. That's a great tip. So flexibility is key. You just need to go with what the subject matter experts want in most cases, while keeping your profession intact. I say that it's critical to keep the profession intact because there's a kind of thought process that anybody can train, and we all know that's not true. I'm a singer, and it's kind of like anybody can sing. Just because you open your mouth and some sound comes out does not mean that you are a trained vocalist, that you are a singer. Anyone can sing, just like anyone can train. We definitely have a profession that we need to follow. And so when I say flexibility is key, it's just, don't sweat the small stuff, don't fight the small stuff. You can't take it personally if they want to change something. And it's just important they are your customer, and so they kind of have the end word on everything. I talked about how I took a lot of the techniques from the ATD conference and training conferences that I've attended, and the key thing that they're doing with graphics right now is they say to have the graphic take up the entire screen, have your text, and this is I have a text box around it and it's transparent, and then to have your font match the graphic. And like I said, I'm not a graphic designer, but this is kind of an example. So I have the cat showing flexibility. My font has a flexible look, so your font needs to match your graphic. That's kind of some of the stuff I've picked up at the conferences that I'm trying to incorporate in when I create training now. Anyway, just kind of show you where my mind was when I made this graphic. I told you that a lot of times they'll make changes at the very end, and the students never know what I'm thinking. I am paddling like crazy. My brain's going like crazy. I'm probably not thinking nice things about the developer at that point, but I don't let the subject matter expert or the class participants know. So it's really good to keep that calm demeanor. And you're going to want to produce a quality product that's delivered on time and will ensure that the end user is going to be able to perform in the workplace based on the training you provide. If you work together with your subject matter expert, this will happen. And it's going to make your life really easy if you can get that relationship built with the subject matter expert. Let me give you a couple of work examples of how I've applied some of these techniques that I've talked about. The first one made me want to pull my hair out. So I felt like this cat. Like I said, we're implementing product lifecycle management at Micron, and it's both a process and a system that we're implementing. And so I'm trying to create training on requirements, and I met with. Oh, okay. Thanks for sharing that about the fonts. That's awesome. And so I met to discuss the requirements training that was needed, and I said, okay, so what's the process for requirements, trying to get that down so I could have the process, because I always believe that the tool should support the process and people have to understand the process and how the tool fits into it. And so I met with my subject matter expert, and he ripped out a blank piece of paper out of his notebook and handed it to me. I'm like, oh, this is great. I mean, he had nothing. And so what I did was I said, okay, so it sounds like your process hasn't been developed yet. Is there anything that we can do from a training perspective to help you? Could we schedule workshops so you have your key players together to develop the process? How can I be of help to you? Which he really appreciated. They ended up doing it on their own, and they're still working on it now. So I need to get back with him and actually find out where they are with that. But um, I tried to show training as being an ally, rather than saying, wait a minute, I need that requirement stuff now. I'm on a timeline. You have to provide that to me. I was more collaborative with them and said, how can we be of help to you? And then I said, okay, I'll come back later when you have things more fleshed out. So that one really was not what I expected when I met with them, was to be given a blank piece of paper and kind of with the expectation that I was going to come up with their requirements for them. The second example I have is I was going to create training on data product model, and that's how we define the products at Micron, and also reports training. And so I met with my subject matter experts and I said, who's the audience? And they said, we don't know who the audience is. And I said, okay. And then they said, what do you want me to train on? And they said, well, I'm not sure what I want you to train on, but I want you to train on product data model and I want you to train on reports. And so I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So what I did was I assumed that I was creating training for the most basic person who would be using it. And then I searched for everything that I could find related to this particular type of report and the product data model. There's a lot of information out there, and I talked to people who had worked with the reports and with the product data model. And then I put the training together the best I could so they would have something to respond to. And I was hopefully I would meet the mark. And so I actually created it from what I would know, because what I would want to know, because I didn't really know these topics. So I was the typical end user who was going to get this overview training. I created the training, and by doing due diligence, my subject matter experts said, you gave me what I wanted, but I didn't give you anything. And then they were able, once they had something to respond to, they could give me things to change and to make it better, but they really didn't know what they wanted until they saw something. So was it perfect? No. But it gave them something to respond to, and then the training was much better at the end. They had no idea what they wanted, and so I had to give them something to respond to. So that was an interesting project that I worked on. And these have been recent examples in the past 6 months to a year. And then the third one is they wanted me to create a product lifecycle management overview training. And so I created it, and I tried to be really, really creative. And I thought, oh, I'm going to put into place what I've learned at these conferences that I've attended. And, I'm going to do the graphics with just a little bit of text on it and that kind of thing. And I'm going to, do things the way that is recommending that we do things in the training world. So everything, it was almost all graphics, and I tried to be really creative. I showed it to my subject matter expert, and the subject matter expert was, no, I do not want these graphics. It's not going to work in the work area because you're working with engineers. They won't accept this. So what I did was I took the content. I didn't get offended because this is what the subject matter experts wants. They know the audience better than I know them. And I turned it back into bullet points with minimal graphics. I kept some of them. They let me keep some of them, and I put some graphics in the corner, but it was into bulleted text, short bullets. So it was a situation where I did what I thought was right. They did not like the whole graphic concept, and they got the content was still the same, and they got what they wanted. So those are just some examples of what I've dealt with and how I've put these principles into play. I'd like to summarize what I've talked about today. So the key points are: you really need to be flexible, be open to feedback. Don't take it personally when you get feedback. You're just trying to get a product that's going to be good for the company. Be respectful of your subject matter expert's time. Be really resourceful, and don't expect them to spoon feed it. to you, and find a mentor and trust them. Your mentor is going to want you to be successful, and so they'll help you go through the waters of the workplace. I guess I'd like to open up for final questions that you might have. That's a really interesting question. Do you feel that having a background in therapy helps you to better understand subject matter experts in the workplace? You know, I think you have to be able to read people really well. And it's kind of interesting that you asked that, because I don't think my background was posted as far as I actually have a degree in music therapy. So when you ask, does having a background in therapy, I think you have to be able to read people really well. You have to help them collaborate. You have to bring your subject matter expert and your end user together. You're really a conduit. So yeah, I think being able to read people and being able to respond to them is very helpful. I wouldn't tell you to go out and get a therapy degree, but I think if you have the ability to read people and make them be successful, if you help them be successful, they are going to want to work with you again. Like I said, I used to be brought in at the week before the training had to happen. Now I'm brought in the day that the project's conceived almost. And it's been a great transition. Any other questions? I just think people skills are incredible. I think I've been doing this. How do I know that my task analysis is adequately detailed for use in design? I think I've been at this business so long that I kind of intuitively know what kind of questions to ask. But I do have, I actually do have a task analysis document that I use when I'm first starting to glean information. Also, I think I get a lot of the task analysis just by being in from the beginning. I hear the discussions of how things are being developed, and that helps me with my task analysis. I think getting in early is really critical. Do I have any input in the selection of your SMEs? No, I don't. They're typically chosen by the business. It would be nice if I did have input. Now, I do have input on so when we train, we typically use a train the trainer approach, where we'll create the training materials and then people are selected from the area to actually provide the training. So we do the instructional design, create the materials, and then they use them just so we have consistency throughout the company. We do have selection criteria for we call them super users, they're the subject matter experts in the area. We do have criteria for those people who are actually going to provide the training. And that criteria is they have to be positive. I mean, we're salespeople as trainers. They may hate the system, but they need to sell it. They have to have good people skills. They have to want to train others. And so we do have criteria for those subject matter experts who are going to serve in a train the trainer role. What do I do when the SME isn't really available? I typically really haven't had that problem with my SMEs, but I'm always careful to make sure that I'm available when it works into their time frame. I also think they realize that without training, that it's not going to be successful. So I just say, can you spend a half an hour with me, 15 minutes? Can I take you for coffee? Let me take you down to the coffee cart and I'll buy you a cup of coffee and get you, we have Starbucks at Micron, so let me get you something. Have I ever partnered with less than an optimal SME? Yes, I have. I have, and I think the way that you deal with that is you make sure that you have bundled your question, record them, just say, let me just take you in a recording room and record you for 30 minutes, and they just spew what they know, and then you take it and make sense of it. Have specific questions so they don't feel like you're wasting their time. Yeah, I have dealt with SMEs that don't particularly want to participate with me. But I think if you can record them, so you're not taking a lot of the time, it's mostly the time, you can record them, make sure you have pointed questions. Also, if you have a lot of things prepared for them, they will appreciate that. That's a great approach. You're going to help make them successful. You're going you're gonna, yeah, I agree, Ted. I'm your salesperson. I've said before, I've said before, let me do your selling for you. I've trained every system at Micron that people hate, and nobody knows that I hate them because I sell them. So I definitely agree with that. You're going to help them be successful. If nobody uses their system, or if they have problems with their system, you're making. I think a selling point I've used before is I'm going to make your life easier, because when the system goes live, they're not going to be coming to you asking you all these kinds of questions if they're trained well. Have you ever sent the SME the question? I have, yes. So have you ever sent the SME the questions you want to ask before the interview to allow them time to prepare their answers and reflect? Yes, I typically do send the questions ahead of time. Also, when I'm going to have them review training materials, I send them the training materials a week in advance. Then I schedule the meeting, and I will schedule all the SMEs I need in the room together. And I also include the link to the training materials in the calendar notice. So I definitely do send the information to them ahead of time so they can be prepared. And sometimes they'll say, I don't need to meet with you. Here are the answers to your questions, and that's fine. So you're not having to have a meeting. Would you say that an SME role is to ensure that the resulting task analysis is complete, accurate, and representative of what the people do in the workplace? I think it's a role, but they don't really care about that. But I think that's more of our role, by questioning them, to make sure that everything's complete and accurate. What tips do I have for when sending the material for review when you only want feedback on the content and nothing else? Great question, Ted. I think you have to be specific and say, what I'm looking for in this review is this. If you don't, they're going to do a grammar review and everything else, and their grammar may not be as good as your grammar is. So I state up front what I'm looking for in the feedback. And also, if I get something from the subject matter expert or another training person, I'll say, what do you want me to edit? What do you want me to look for? Am I editing for grammar? Am I editing for content? What am I editing for? Am I editing for the look and feel? I'll typically ask that question also, because if they're just looking for a content review and I start being a grammar Nazi, that's not going to earn you a positive relationship with them. So I would, on both sides, I would say what you're looking for in the review, and then if they're asking you to review something, clarify what they're looking for. I think that's a really great point. I've had training people really turn people off and not want to work with them because they are too picky with grammar and things like that. Oh, that's a great question, Jessica. Best way to resolve conflicting direction between SMEs and key stakeholders. Really, your key stakeholder is the ultimate person that you're working with. So that is a great question. It's got to be collaboration. I think it's getting them in a room together and seeing what the direction is. I will always defer to the key stakeholder. A lot of my job is being a mediator, actually. Go ahead, Ted. What's your idea? What if they want is bad for the learner? Jessica, give me an example of that.
With the SMEs and the stakeholders, I know that I've gone to the SME because no two people in the world have ever gotten along so well as when they hate the same person. It's just human nature. So I've gone to a SME knowing this and said, hey, look, I agree with you. I think that this is really the important point, but I have this key stakeholder. You can even mention them by name. Chances are they know who they are too. And you could say, and this is what they're pushing for. So here's what I want to do. I'd like you to help me deliver the message that you feel is important in a way that meets what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's a mediation, it's a collaboration, and I think it's just give me an example of where you have a conflicting direction between SMEs and key stakeholders. Do you have an example or? Okay. Yeah, I've actually had this situation. Um, what I've done is I've actually talked to the key stakeholder and said, "These are the things that we need to cover in the training. This is the importance of doing it this way. This is what you're gonna lose if you cut it to an hour. Are you comfortable if you're losing that content?" Um, Typically, we are always given we recommend 4 hours. No, you only have 1 hour. I have dealt with that a lot. If you can't, I would talk to them, let them know what you're planning on covering, why, and what you're gonna lose if you, only have it for an hour. You are pretty much beholden to your stakeholder, though. So what I'll try to do is let them know what they're gonna lose, what they're gonna gain by having it the 4 hours, what content will have to be cut with the 1 hour, and what the, impact's gonna be to the end user in the workplace, because, really, that's what you're after, is having a change in behavior in the workplace. Um, and so that's kind of the approach I take, and that, if they don't have that hands-on, they're probably gonna make mistakes, which is gonna cost you this amount of money. Do it in cost. They understand that kind of language. Um, those would be my recommendations, but, yeah, I've been through that a lot, where they say, "Let's do it in this amount of time instead of this amount of time." Well, I had that situation where they wanted to, we recommended the training be 2 days, and it was 1 day. Um, and um, we told them what the benefits would be, for having it be 1 day versus 2 days, and they wouldn't budge, and so we did it in the 1 day. And we just had to condense our content. I agree. It's important to let the stakeholder understand the cost benefits. If they understand that whole financial, this is what's going to cost you. And a lot of times I'll get the, well, we don't have the time, we can't spend the money. You're either going to spend the money up front on training, or you're going to spend more money at the end, because people aren't going to be doing things correctly. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to, potentially destroy millions of dollars of products. So you're either spending it up front or you're spending it at the end. And that's kind of the approach I use. Do you want to spend it up front, or or do you want to spend it at the end? But they understand money. I agree, Brian. And it is ultimately the stakeholders' decision.
At this point, we've come to the end of the time that we have. Martha, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
You're welcome.
We've reached the end of this webinar, so I'd like to wish everybody good evening, and this is the end of the webinar. Thank you.